Hey guys. Tonight we travel back, way back, to a place where the Atlantic wind bites your nose, the seagulls scream like banshees, and the wooden hull of your ship creaks with every crashing wave. You're on a slow-moving vessel in the year 1761, drifting up the mighty St. Lawrence River after a long transatlantic haul. The air smells like salt, pine, and seaweed. The mist clings to your coat, and the chill seeps through your wool right into your bones. You probably won't survive this without a wool sock fire and an unreasonable tolerance for wet bread. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The shoreline shifts slowly as you make your way east of Quebec City. On your right, massive cliffs rise out of the water like jagged black teeth. Pine trees teeter on their summits, and the sky feels oppressively wide. But then it happens. A break in the rock. A curve. A sleepy little cove where a river slips quietly into the St. Lawrence. You, a rugged Highland officer in the 78th Regiment Colonel John Nairn, recognize potential in this forgotten place called Maldea, a place where the French once carved out a few farms, only to watch them burn in the British conquest. Now the land waits again. Empty. Bruised. But yours for the taking if you can endure what it demands. The British Crown, eager to settle its new Canadian prize, offers seigneuries, giant land parcels to officers willing to civilize them. You sign the papers with stiff fingers, still sore from battle. Your seigneury stretches for miles along both sides of the Murray River, the same little trickle you just passed. Locals already call it La Malbaie, the Bad Bay, because ships crash in its shallows and tides rise like angry ghosts. But you don't believe in bad omens. You believe in land. Land and legacy. You step ashore, boots sinking into the spongy forest floor. The air is still, broken only by the whistle of a loon. Around you, silence. Behind you, 2 battered boats full of supplies and a handful of settlers, mostly Scots like you, drawn by promises of land and new beginnings. Ahead, a dark wall of spruce and fir that'll need to be chopped, burned, and planted if anyone wants to eat come spring. There is no manor yet, just a ramshackle log cabin and the charred remains of French structures torched in 1759. You move in anyway, lighting a fire in the stone hearth and watching smoke coil through holes in the roof. This will be your headquarters, your home, your monument in the wilderness. It smells like ambition and mold. Each morning, you haul your aching body out of bed to check on your men. You walk the valley, noting where the soil is black and deep, where it's just stubborn rock and roots. You plan grain fields, a chapel, a dock, and yes, a proper manor house. But winter doesn't care about your blueprints. It arrives like a sledgehammer. Snowdrifts cover doors, the river freezes solid, and your ink freezes in its well. You learn to layer your wool like bark on a birch tree. Some nights, your breath fogs as you write letters by candlelight, letters to old comrades still in Scotland, letters to your brother Robert in India, letters to the authorities in Quebec begging for more nails, more shingles, more anything. Most go unanswered. Communication in this century is like whispering through soup. You barter with French-Canadian locals who never left. They give you salt pork and stale bread in exchange for promises you haven't figured out how to keep yet. You're not their kind of seigneur. You speak a foreign language, pray in a different church, and talk about hard work as if it's a hobby. Still, you try. By spring, your clothes hang looser and your beard is full of gray. But the land begins to respond. A field sprouts green. A cow calves. The river flows again. You survived your first Canadian winter. Barely. What no one tells you is that the hardest part isn't the weather. It's the ache of being so thoroughly forgotten. The colonial government is too far and too distracted to care. Supplies arrive late or not at all. Mail, when it comes, is months old. You build anyway. You drop contracts for tenants and carve a garden behind your rough house. You make rules, no swearing on Sundays. Church attendance is encouraged, and loitering is a finable offense. You laugh sometimes at how serious you've become. Historians still argue whether Nairn was truly welcomed by his French-Canadian neighbors or simply endured with a resigned shrug. But to you, their quiet presence is a kind of comfort. You don't speak their tongue well, but you all know what hunger feels like, what frostbite means, what happens when a log roof gives out at midnight. You're not so different. One summer morning, as fog rolls off the bay, you climb to the bluff overlooking the water. You squint out at the ships, few and far between. Maybe one day your son will stand here. Maybe he'll inherit something better. A manor, a people, a future not stitched together with frost-cracked fingers and prayers to a faraway king. But the funny thing about dreams built from wilderness is that they don't always behave. Some bend with the wind, some snap. Still, for now, you head back down the trail, boots crunching over pine needles, and get back to work. There's timber to cut, barley to plant, and a dynasty to begin. The manor doesn't rise all at once. No, you coax it into being the way a blacksmith draws a blade from raw ore, slowly and with more smoke than elegance. You start with a timber frame, notched and pegged with care. Each board you hoist feels heavier than the last, and by week's end, your hands are blistered raw. But it's going to stand. Not a cabin this time, but a real house, 2 full stories if the beams don't warp. Thick stone hearth, wood-planked floors. You call it Murray Manor, and the name sticks, mostly because you repeat it often enough in your letters and contracts. At the heart of it is your belief in permanence, an echo of every Scottish castle story you heard as a child, now reinterpreted in fir and pine and tar. You've got no crenellations, no moat, but the sheer act of planting a chimney here and calling it a manor feels like a declaration of civilization. Of course, no one else is buying the dream just yet. The local French Canadians, your subsidiaries, treat you politely but skeptically. You're the Anglais, the outsider, the Protestant with a pension and a fancy hat. Still, you're their seigneur, and that title means something. They give you annual dues in grain or labor, plow your fields when requested, and though they don't love it, cut timber for your fences and roads. But they do it in silence, with a sideways glance, as if waiting to see if you'll vanish like the last man who tried to rule from this rocky valley. You write your own rule book, blending Scottish military instinct with the leftover bones of French feudalism. Tenants get 20-acre strips running back from the river, the traditional layout. They owe you field work and firewood and a chicken now and then. Symbolic stuff, but deeply rooted. In return, you promise stability, justice, and a schoolhouse someday, if God allows. But God seems distracted. You enforce order with clipped sermons and a pocket watch. You walk the lanes like a patrolman, taking note of missing fence rails and idle hands. You encourage hard cider, but discourage idleness. You believe in thrift, prayer, and boots that last 2 winters. And, of course, You believe in education, though your first school teacher runs off with a widow in year 2. Some evenings, after all the inspections and grain ledgers, you sit in the parlor with a tot of rum, staring at your boots, and wonder what madness made you choose this place. The bay groans in the distance. Owls hoot like unhappy babies in the trees. In the hearth, sparks drift upward like lost wishes. Still, there are victories. You host your first tenant gathering by year 3. It's part rent collection, part harvest feast, part awkward experiment. You bake bannock, pour cider, and speak stiff French to a room full of people who respond with shrugs and murmured Latin. One man gives you a wooden spoon, another just eats and leaves. But a few smile, a few stay to play cards. A few even laugh when you recount the time your outhouse froze solid and refused to function for 3 months. You decide to count this as progress. Then there's the garden. It starts as a few hopeful rows, onions, beets, barley, and becomes your quiet obsession. You experiment with turnip varieties, dig drainage channels, and track weather patterns like a man solving a mystery. In a way, the garden is your real cathedral, your act of faith. Every potato that sprouts is a victory over chaos. But your real hope isn't rooted in soil, it's in blood. You marry, finally. After years of correspondence and careful calculation, she is of good Scottish stock, modest inheritance, excellent handwriting. When she arrives in the spring of 1769, stepping off a mail schooner with a trunk and a wary smile, you feel like the manor is truly complete. You watch her squint at the house, the rocky lane, the cow chewing on the porch railing, and you pray, silently, that she doesn't turn around. She stays. Together you fill the house with children, with music, with plans. You name your firstborn Thomas, and whisper to him of lineage and duty before he can even lift his head. You teach him to measure shadows, to load a musket, and to nod solemnly when addressed. You hope one day he'll wear your boots and carry the manor forward. But the manor isn't just a house. It's a symbol, and symbols come with weight. Every nail you hammer echoes with expectation. Every ledger you balance becomes part of a story you want etched in stone. You order portraits, miniatures mostly, to hang in the hall. You acquire books, old Bibles, and a decent violin, even though you haven't played in 20 years. You commission a bell for the belfry, one that rings across the valley at mealtimes, summoning workers like some benevolent overlord in a novel. Historians still argue whether Nain's life at the manor was more fiction than function, a soldier's fantasy of nobility superimposed on a stubborn Canadian landscape. But fantasy or not, you live it fully. There are moments of genuine pride when a young tenant presents you with his child for a blessing, when you broker a marriage contract between 2 feuding families, when the first school finally opens and your daughter reads aloud from the Psalms, voice quivering but clear. There are also moments of despair when frost kills the barley, when a tenant flees in the night, owing back rent and leaving only a broken yoke, when the roof leaks in 3 rooms at once and no one in the valley knows how to fix shingles properly. But the manor holds, so do you. Each day begins with a slow circuit of your land, on horseback if the trail's passable, on foot when the snowdrifts get ambitious. You nod to tenants, inspect fences,
jot notes in a leather journal. You carry a small wooden cross in your coat pocket, a quiet compromise between your stern Presbyterian upbringing and the Catholic customs that saturate the valley. By now, you're no longer just a Highlander in exile. You're the patriarch of something fragile and fierce, a community stitched together by necessity and stubborn hope. A manor, yes, but also a people, a future. And you're just getting started.
You learn quickly that the manor is not the center of the universe, not even close. Most days, you're not even the center of your own domain. The real center is the church, the little stone chapel down the slope where bells ring in Latin and sermons swirl and incense in French. You sit there on feast days, a slightly awkward presence in a sea of bowing heads. You cross your arms while others cross themselves. You mouth hymns you can't pronounce. It's not that you're unwelcome. The villagers are, by and large, cordial. But there's a clear line between you and them, and it's drawn in old loyalties and older languages. You come from a world of tartan, King George, and predestination. They come from peasant Catholicism and a rhythm of life measured in saints' days and harvests. They work hard. They pray harder. And you quickly realize that if anyone's going to change, it'll have to be you. Still, you try. You host debates with the local curé over theology and field rotations. You propose Sunday literacy lessons for the children, using Protestant primers, of course, and receive a gentle but firm no. You offer to pay for an English-speaking schoolmaster. The villagers, to your face, nod. Behind your back, they sign petitions to the Bishop of Quebec. So you adapt. You stop trying to convert your tenants and instead focus on making life livable for them. You allow them to celebrate feast days. You tolerate their candlelit processions, their May altars, their superstitions about forest spirits and guardian saints. You nod politely when someone tells you a cow went dry because it was looked at the wrong way on a Friday. You've seen weirder. Sometimes you wonder what your fellow officers would think of you now. John Nairn, the Calvinist seigneur who attends Mass on Christmas Eve and prays for good weather at the feet of a plaster Virgin Mary. But the land changes you. Quietly and without permission, you become bilingual in thought, if not in tongue. Your tenants keep their customs. They also keep their gardens, their chickens, their stubborn generational memory. You hear whispers that some still pray for a return to French rule. Others just want cheaper flour. Either way, they're not going anywhere. And truth be told, neither are you. You try your hand at peacemaking. When a tenant accuses another of stealing firewood, you hold court at the manor kitchen table. You serve cider, nod sagely, and try not to laugh when the dispute turns into an argument about who's the worst pig farmer. You resolve it with a coin toss. They both leave annoyed, but satisfied. The people around you are not caricatures. They're individuals, with nicknames and birthmarks and opinions about whose goat makes the best cheese. You learn their rhythms. Who wakes first? Who drinks too much? Who sings lullabies off-key but with great sincerity? Some tenants begin leaving small offerings, eggs in a basket, a carved spoon, a folded note thanking you for the new footbridge. Others just offer nods. In this place, a nod means more than a letter of recommendation. It means you're not a stranger anymore. Still, the religious wall remains. You know your own children will grow up in tension, torn between your Protestant ideal and the Catholic tide all around them. Your wife clings to family prayer. You reinforce the Sabbath with strict meals and stricter bedtime stories. But outside your walls, the world is bells and incense and mystery. Historians still debate whether you truly accepted this religious duality or simply tolerated it for survival. But either way, you persist.
Sometimes you catch yourself humming French hymns while fixing a fence. You stop mid-hum and shake your head. Old habits, you tell yourself. But you know better. You're changing. You even start to see value in their rituals. On the Feast of St. Anne, you watch a procession of villagers walk barefoot along the muddy lane, singing as they go. There's something haunting about the candlelight, the soaked hems of skirts, the way even the children chant with solemn faces. It's not your tradition, but it stirs something ancient in you. Maybe not belief, but respect. You still hold your own traditions close. Burns Night, Hogmanay, letters to distant cousins back in Scotland filled with tales of moose sightings and firewood shortages. You write with ink made from berries and tears. Okay, mostly berries. You also begin documenting everything. The manor's ledgers expand into journals. Weather notes, tenant behavior, thoughts on politics, farming methods, even sermons you've overheard and half understood. Your handwriting becomes cramped but elegant. You develop opinions on everything. Carrot storage, dental hygiene, the moral decay of Quebec society. You record it all, not because anyone's reading, but because it gives you shape. Sometimes you send your writings to Quebec City. The governor writes back once, briefly, a kind thank you and an offer to visit, which he doesn't keep. Still, you pin the letter to the manor study wall like a trophy. One must celebrate small victories. Winter returns, and with it, silence. The villagers retreat indoors. The roads vanish under snowdrifts. Wolves howl in the distance, though you're pretty sure it's just your tenant Michelle's dog again. Either way, you double bolt the door. You count candles. You read the same 5 books until the pages feel like old friends. You teach your son to recite Psalm 23 in both English and French, just in case one version works better. One morning, you find a note pinned to your barn. It's from the curé. He invites you to a winter supper. You're not sure if it's an ambush, a reconciliation, or both. You accept. The night of the supper, you walk the snowy lane with a bottle of rum and a polite smile. Inside the rectory, the table is warm, the food is rich, and the conversation, oddly, never touches religion. You talk about hay yields, about chimney repairs, about how Canada somehow manages to freeze your bones in new and creative ways each year. You leave with a full belly, a bit of a buzz, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, you're no longer the stranger. You're still the seigneur, but now you're also part of the story.
By your 10th year at the manor, the land begins speaking back to you not in words, but in odd little rhythms. The groan of floorboards that only happens before a storm. The particular scent of wet pine that means spring is coming early. The fact that beluga whales are always right on time. Ah yes, the belugas. You've never gotten used to them. They arrive each year in May, ghost-like and pale, gliding through the cold blue St. Lawrence like forgotten gods. Their puffing breaths echo off the cliffs. At first, you mistake them for sea monsters. Then someone tells you they're called marsouin blanc and considered valuable. Suddenly, you're looking at them through a different lens, one of coin purses and potential. Whale oil, as it turns out, burns cleaner than tallow and fetches a decent price. The French used to fish them regularly from Malbay's little estuary, launching long wooden rowboats with harpoons ready. Your tenants still know how to do it, even if they pretend they've forgotten. After some persuasion and an awkward attempt at drawing whales on your dinner napkins, you get a few to relaunch the hunt. It's a gruesome, slippery business. You try once to join a hunt. Big mistake. The rowboat lurches, the harpoon misses, and the whale disappears under your boat with an ominous thunk. You spend the next 2 days recovering from seasickness and bruised pride. After that, you leave it to the experts and simply take your share. It becomes a small industry, not booming, but steady. Whale oil is stored in barrels at the dock next to sacks of salted cod and bundles of furs. The manor takes a cut, as all seigneurs do.
You also begin taxing access to the best fishing holes, which earns you a few snide remarks and one anonymous letter composed entirely of barnyard insults spelled phonetically. Still, you persist, not just because it helps the manor's books, but because it brings the village together. Men share stories as they mend nets, children gut fish with disturbing enthusiasm, women smoke eels and tell stories about moonlight pregnancies and river spirits with glowing eyes. It's a little ecosystem, not just of trade, but of memory. There's a charm to it. You once stumble upon a group of tenants playing a game with wooden shoes. Turns out they filled the clogs with pebbles and raced them down the icy lane, betting who gets farthest. You're invited to try. Yours veers off and hits a chicken. Everyone laughs, including, blessedly, the chicken. These are the things no history book ever captures. The games, the smells, the absurd little moments that hold a world together. And speaking of absurd moments, you attend your first sugaring off party one chilly March. It's a celebration of the maple sap harvest, which you initially dismiss as tree leakage, until you taste the result. You arrive to find villagers dancing on packed snow, passing around steaming cups of maple taffy and slabs of fried dough called oreille de cris. Yes, pig ears. You eat too. You regret it immediately. But the taffy? Worth every sticky tooth. These seasonal rituals, sugaring, fishing, haying, cider pressing, become the true calendar by which the manor lives. The months marked in red ink in your ledgers are only part of the story. The real rhythm is in smoke and mud and muscle. Still, economics remain tricky. You discover that tenants don't always pay in full or on time. Sometimes they offer barrels of apples when you asked for wheat, or claim the river ate their tax chicken. One even insists his cow was hexed by a traveling peddler and stopped producing milk in protest. You respond with your best courtroom face and a generous shrug. You can afford to be generous. For now. But you also know the numbers don't lie. The manor needs to grow. The margins are tight. You consider building a sawmill to process lumber, which would give the village a new income stream and allow you to ship planks to Quebec City. But mills are expensive, and finding the right builder is like searching for a sober fiddler at a wedding. Eventually, you find a French carpenter with one good eye and 3 missing fingers. His name is Etienne, and despite looking like a walking cautionary tale, he's brilliant. He sketches the mill in charcoal on your barn wall and builds it mostly out of scrap timber, rope, and stubbornness. It creaks ominously in the wind, but it works. The sawmill changes everything. It speeds up building, it provides jobs, it brings in outsiders, traders, woodcutters, even a few Protestant missionaries who show up like over-caffeinated crows. You politely turn them away. You've already got one religion too many in this valley. With timber money flowing and whale oil bubbling in barrels, you invest in small luxuries. A second horse, a silver ink stand, a pair of spectacles that make your handwriting look less like battlefield scrawl. Your wife requests wallpaper from France. You send for it, half expecting it to be intercepted by pirates or eaten by mold in transit. Miraculously, it arrives. It depicts pastoral scenes, shepherds and lambs and overly muscular cherubs. You hang it in the front room. It peels within a week, but she's thrilled anyway. Sometimes comfort is more about illusion than endurance. You begin holding Sunday salons, not fancy ones, mind you, but gatherings. Cider, music, some mild theological squabbling. Occasionally, someone brings a violin. Your daughter tries to play it like a saw. That's inexperience. One evening, an old tenant named Baptiste tells a story about a porpoise that saved a drowning man. He swears the creature pushed him back to shore with its nose. You raise your eyebrow. He winks. Later, you realize every child in the room now believes porpoises are guardian angels. Historians still argue whether these community tales were rooted in truth or simply tools for social cohesion. You just enjoy the storytelling. Yet even with the laughter, there's a constant weight in your chest, a nagging awareness that none of this is permanent. Crops fail, timber rots, kids grow up and leave. One day, someone else will sit at this table, look out this window, and wonder who built it all. But for now, you watch the moon rise over the Murray River. The tide creeps in, the wind hums against the window panes. And somewhere out there, a beluga surfaces, breath steaming like a kettle in the dusk.
You wake early now, not because you have to, but because the quiet before dawn is yours alone. You sit by the kitchen hearth with a mug of bitter tea and your leather-bound journal. The quill squeaks as you write, and the pages soak up ink like parched soil. This is where you record everything: weather, crop yields, tenant quarrels, even dreams you can't explain. It's part diary, part ledger, part therapy session, and increasingly, part mailbox. Your correspondence has become a lifeline, a thread stretched thin across oceans and wars. You write to Robert, your younger brother, now a soldier stationed in India. His letters come back filled with a scent of dust and pepper, describing jungles and elephants and monsoons that soak everything, even gunpowder. He writes of skirmishes and sieges, of disease and heat, of how the sun there is not a light, but a judgment. You imagine him sweating in a wool uniform far from home, his hands blistered, his letters smudged by rain and blood, and you imagine yourself here in a cold stone house on the edge of Canada, waiting months for news that might already be irrelevant by the time it arrives. And yet, you wait. Some nights, after the house has gone quiet and the only sound is the ticking of your pocket watch, you read Robert's letters aloud to the fire. You picture his handwriting forming in some makeshift tent halfway around the world. You picture him grinning at your complaints about leaky roofs and pig thefts. Then you fold his letter neatly and slide it under your pillow. Superstition? Perhaps. But you've seen worse coping mechanisms. One of your tenants swears by cabbage poultices for anxiety. Not all the letters are from soldiers. Some come from relatives in Scotland, updating you on who's died, who's married, and who has shamefully taken up work in trade. Your cousin Duncan, apparently, now sells soap. This is scandalous. You buy 3 bars. One packet arrives sealed in red wax and carries the insignia of Gibraltar. It's from a cousin of your wife's family, another Nairn, though distantly related. He's stationed at the British garrison and writes of cannon drills, Spanish suspicion, and the utter lack of decent cheese. He includes a sketch of a monkey said to haunt the cliffs there. You show it to your children, they name it Fergus. But the most anticipated letters are from Thomas. Your firstborn has reached the age where boys become enigmas. He's too old to be a child, too young to be a man, and just smart enough to think he's already both. You send him to Quebec for schooling, where he boards with a retired officer and studies Latin, mathematics, and the fine art of not embarrassing his lineage. The first few letters from him are clumsy but charming. He signs them, "Your most obedient son, Thomas," with elaborate loops and doodles in the margins. He complains about the food, brags about his fencing, and once writes an entire paragraph about how he outran a goose. Then the letters change. They become more thoughtful, more guarded. He starts asking questions about duty, legacy, the meaning of honor. You try to answer with wisdom, but sometimes all you can muster is honesty. There are days, you write back, when the land is quiet and the ledger is full and I think I have won. And then without warning, a bean cracks, a harvest fails, or someone I love dies, and I realize this is all scaffolding. Historians still debate whether the Nairn correspondence reveals emotional depth or simply a soldier's discipline and florid prose. You'd argue it's both. The letters keep you human. They remind you that what you're building is more than fences and flower bins. It's a story, a chain. You keep
everything. Even the bad letters. One from a tenant who accuses you of favoritism and greed. One from a Quebec official reprimanding you for sending whale oil that reeked of burnt fish. One from your old regimental comrade, Malcolm Fraser, complaining about how hard it is to govern his own neighboring seigneury, Mount Murray, without going mad. You and Malcolm exchange letters often now. You even meet once or twice a year, taking turns hosting each other over tough bread, watery soup, and hours of war stories. He's gruffer than you remember, and his beard has gone fully white, but his mind is sharp. He's also quietly worried that the whole seigneurial system is already outdated, that the people want less tradition and more independence. You nod when he says this. You don't entirely agree, but you've learned not to argue when the cider is strong and the fire is low. One spring, a packet arrives from London publisher. You'd forgotten you sent them a few pages, excerpts from your letters and journals, mostly about farming and early settlement. They liked it. They want more. You sit at your desk that night, stunned, then laugh so hard you wake the dog. You've spent your life chasing order in a wilderness that refuses to be tamed, and now someone wants to print your chaos? You send them 30 more pages. It's strange, the idea that your life, your ordinary, frost-bitten, letter-filled life, might become part of something bigger. That people in drawing rooms across the Atlantic might read about a man fighting mold and mediating cow disputes in a place they can't even pronounce. You write anyway. You write because the act of writing is a tether between your past and future, between this world and the ones drifting far beyond the sea. Some nights, when the wind is still and the house is asleep, you go outside. You sit on the stone bench by the manor's garden wall and look up at the stars. The same stars Robert sees, the same stars Thomas will inherit. You don't know if your story matters, but you keep telling it. One page at a time.
You hear it before you read it, rumors riding the river like driftwood, carried in by voyageurs with cracked hands and louder mouths. Something stirring down south. 13 colonies are agitating like a pot about to boil over. Tax protests, torch-lit mobs, pamphlets declaring liberty with a capital L. At first, you wave it off. The Americans have always been noisy. They complain about tea, stamp duties, royal charters, and then go right back to bartering beaver pelts and arguing about turnips. But this time feels different. The letters from Quebec confirm it. Boston is burning with revolutionary fever, and British officers are already pulling their boots back on. And you? You glance at your coat in the closet, the one with the stiff collar and old epaulets. You haven't worn it in years, but you dust it off anyway, just in case. Your tenants watch quietly. They're no strangers to upheaval. Many of their fathers were here when Wolfe's cannons echoed down the cliffs. And now they hear whispers that the Americans might march north, promising liberty, cheap land, and full Catholic rights. Some villagers nod when they hear this. Others frown. You, on the other hand, scowl like someone just offered you moldy cheese on a silver plate. You're not against liberty. You just don't like mobs, or tea riots, or the idea of someone overturning everything you've spent a decade building just because they got angry about postage. Still, orders arrive. As a former officer and landholding loyalist, you're expected to support the British cause. You dust off your saber. It feels heavier now. Probably hasn't gained weight. More likely your arm has lost some. You rejoin the military under a new banner, the Royal Highland Immigrants, a regiment cobbled together from ex-soldiers, settlers, and anyone still loyal to the crown.
It's a bit like trying to organize a symphony out of secondhand fiddles and rusty triangles, but somehow it works. You're given the rank of major. It comes with a horse, an allowance, and a fresh stack of bureaucratic headaches. You're sent to patrol key posts, Isle aux Noix, Sorel, and even back to Quebec itself. The roads are brutal, the accommodations worse. You miss your manor's creaky bed and your wife's dubious porridge, but there's a job to do. In 1775, General Richard Montgomery and a strange fellow named Benedict Arnold lead an American force up toward Canada. They think they can convince the French Canadians to rise up and join their cause. For a moment, it even looks like they might be right. Propaganda floods the countryside. Some habitants listen, others just shrug and get back to splitting firewood. You are stationed in Quebec when the siege begins. It's December and cold. Not need an extra blanket cold. We're talking your tears freeze before you finish crying cold. Arnold's troops are half frozen, half starved, and wholly committed. They even have the audacity to launch a midnight assault on New Year's Eve. You're standing at a parapet when it begins. Snow whipping sideways, muskets cracking, bells ringing in panic. You help direct counterfire, your old instincts kicking in like stiff joints in a sudden sprint. Montgomery is killed in the chaos. Arnold is wounded. The Americans retreat, leaving behind corpses and confusion. The siege continues a while longer, but the tide turns. You survive. Again. Historians still argue whether the French Canadians could have been swayed, whether one more barrel of flour or one less snub from a British general might have changed the whole war. But from your window in Quebec, none of that matters. What matters is that the manor still stands, your family is safe, and the bay will welcome you home. Eventually, you return to Murray Bay. Your tenants are subdued, but loyal. A few eye you cautiously, unsure whether you've returned as seigneur or soldier. You assure them it's the former. You leave the saber hanging near the front door, more decoration than deterrent. Yet the war isn't over. It drags on, one campaign bleeding into the next. You're summoned again, this time to Carleton Island, then to guard prisoners captured in skirmishes across the northern frontier. And oh, the prisoners. They arrive in soggy boots and sour moods. A few claim they were just lost. Others are belligerent, insisting Canada has no right to exist at all. You house a group of them briefly at the manor under armed watch. Your daughter teaches one to say porridge correctly. He returns the favor by carving a tiny eagle into a table leg. One night, they escape. You're furious, not because they got away, but because they left the chicken coop open and now you're short 4 hens. You dispatch riders. A few days later, they're recaptured by a neighbor and returned, sheepish and hungry. You deduct the chickens from their ration. They write sullen poems about tyranny. Still, you treat them humanely, partly because you're an officer, mostly because your wife insists on feeding everyone, even seditious escapees with no table manners. The war finally ends in 1883. The Americans win. You're not thrilled, but you also don't throw a tantrum. Life, after all, is made of compromises. The border shifts, some loyalists flee north to join you in Canada, setting up towns with hopeful names like New London and Loyal Hill that eventually just become hardware stores and post offices. You're granted a pension for your service and a pat on the back from bureaucrats who never once stepped outside London. Back at the manor, life resumes. You rebuild the garden, patch the barn, replace the 4 missing chickens. Your children are older now. Thomas talks about joining the army. You feel a mix of pride and dread. Another war, another uniform. You nod and pretend you're already writing goodbye letters in your head. Your villagers respect you more now, not because you fought, but because you returned. You didn't abandon them when gunfire echoed across the valley. You came back, coat tattered, hands calloused, and picked up the same shovel they'd never put down. There are still tensions. A tenant resists paying rent. The curé gives another fire and brimstone sermon about vanity, probably aimed at your new vase quote. But you shrug. You've survived another chapter of empire, another roll of history's dice. And the manor, it still stands. The bell still rings. The wails still come. And in a battered wooden chest under your bed are medals, letters, and one carved table leg that no one dares repair. The cold comes earlier now. You feel it in your joints first, a certain stiffness in your fingers when you write, a little more effort required to get out of bed, to climb the narrow stairs, to haul a pail of water from the well. You don't complain. You're a Highlander, after all, but you do start wearing thicker socks and muttering about the virtues of Caribbean postings. Winter at Murray Bay is not just a season, it's a sentence. Snow piles high against the manor walls, drifts curling like waves frozen mid-crash. The bay itself vanishes beneath thick slabs of ice, cracking like distant cannon fire when the wind shifts. And once the last boat leaves in October, the manor becomes an island. No mail, no visitors, no escape. So you build your systems. Communication becomes a kind of choreography. Across the St. Lawrence, a fellow settler, one with whom you've arranged a clever system of signal lanterns, mirrors your vigilance. A single light at dusk means all is well. 2 lights mean send help or brandy. 3 lights mean wolf attack or worse. Thankfully, it's mostly 1 lantern. Still, you check each night just in case. Inside, the household settles into winter rhythms. The big hearth blazes constantly. The hallways smell like dried herbs, beeswax, and something faintly medicinal. Probably whatever your wife is boiling for a cough remedy. You cut and stack firewood until your arms ache, and still you worry it won't be enough. The children grow restless. They skate on the frozen river, their laughter echoing down the valley. Your son tries building a snow fort so ambitious it collapses and nearly traps him inside. He emerges coughing, laughing, and covered in ice. You pretend to scold him, but secretly you're proud. Ambition runs in the family. Each evening, you read by candlelight, your breath fogging slightly in the frigid study. You reread your own journals from 10 years back and marvel at how naive you sounded. Today, we begin constructing the mill. How confidently you assumed things would go to plan. The mill, of course, flooded 3 times and now produces more gossip than lumber. Still, the villagers make it through each winter. Barely. Some households disappear. Entire families slip away to Quebec in the fall and never return. Others cling stubbornly to the land, passing the same patched coat between 3 brothers and tying straw bundles around their shoes when the leather wears thin. You do what you can. When the snows hit hardest, you send food parcels from the manor. Flour, salted pork, a wedge of questionable cheese. You try to keep spirits up, sometimes literally. You hold small gatherings by candlelight, offering cider and storytelling. One evening, you recite Burns' poetry by heart, while a neighbor's son plays the fiddle. Badly, but with great enthusiasm. It's the kind of terrible performance that warms a room. But sometimes there's sadness you can't fix. A woman loses her husband to pneumonia. A child disappears into the forest chasing a rabbit and is found days later, alive, miraculously, but changed. Quiet. You help dig graves, clear snow from paths, and hold trembling hands. It's not what you imagined when you came here, senior's charter in hand and ambition blazing, but it's what this life demands. The snow muffles everything. Your footsteps, your thoughts, even time itself. Days blur, January becomes February with no warning. You mark the passage of weeks, not by the calendar, but by the gradual dwindling of firewood and the frequency of tenant visits. They come less often in deep winter, bundled in wool and desperation, hats pulled low, mouths full of apologies and frost. You begin to dream more vividly, sometimes of Scotland, its misty glens and peat fires and the narrow kitchen where your mother sang while baking. Sometimes of battles long past, bayonets flashing and orders screamed over wind and gunpowder. Occasionally you dream of nothing at all, just the cold silence of snow falling on a black bay. Historians still debate whether Murray Bay's isolation hindered or protected it, whether its remoteness spared it from external politics or condemned it to perpetual obscurity. But from your chair by the hearth, it feels like both, a sanctuary and a prison, a jewel and a burden. Still, there's beauty in the stillness, in the way icicles catch fire in the morning sun, in the rhythm of boots crunching on fresh snow, in the shared smiles of neighbors who've just survived another blizzard. There's pride, too, when the manor's chimneys continue to smoke while others go dark, when your eldest daughter stitches mittens for the entire village, when your wife organizes a sleigh ride with bells salvaged from a broken harness. Then the thaw comes. You smell it first. A shift in the air, less biting, more alive. The snow melts reluctantly, pulling back like a tide. The river groans, then bursts free. Ice slabs cracking and tumbling downstream like shattered mirrors. The whole valley seems to exhale. The first letter of the season arrives in April, carried by a shivering courier with chapped hands and a grin. It's from Quebec, full of news and promises and, as always, requests for reports. You answer it promptly, dipping your quill with practiced ease. All is well, you write. We inured. You always do. By May, the garden reawakens. Shoots poke through the soil like hopeful green fingers. The villagers return to their fields, shoulders squared, hands blistered anew. Children chase dragonflies. Women hang blankets out to dry. The manor opens its shutters and breathes again. You walk to the edge of the bluff overlooking the bay and see the water moving freely, sparkling with sunlight and the hint of returning whales. In the distance, a schooner's sail flutters into view, white against blue. Supply or visitor? You can't tell. Doesn't matter. Either way, life begins again. And you? Well, you go back inside. You put the kettle on, set out 2 mugs, just in case someone knocks. Because in this land of snow and signal fires, isolation is never permanent. It only teaches you to value the knock when it comes.
The snow has melted, but not all the tensions have. As the fields dry and the roads become passable, the village stirs from hibernation and resumes its complicated dance with the manor. You step into spring like a man returning to a delicate conversation paused mid-sentence. The first order of business, education. You've always believed in learning. A proper education, you've often said, is the backbone of any civilized people, right after sturdy boots and decent porridge. But implementing this vision in Murray Bay is, let's just say it's like trying to teach a sheep to waltz. The French-Canadian tenants are skeptical of your plans, especially when the books you distribute are in English. Your offer to teach the children numbers, geography, and the glories of the British Empire is met with blank stares and a pointed cough from the curé. He suggests, with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, that the children's souls might be better served by memorizing catechism rather than colonial maps. You sigh. You adjust. Eventually, you and the curé reach an uneasy compromise. He'll allow a schoolhouse to open if it also teaches French and Catholic doctrine. You agree, though you secretly hope that a few Protestant hymns and British historical dates might still sneak in through the back door. The first schoolmaster arrives in July. His name is Jacques.
He's nervous, prematurely balding, and wears a coat 2 sizes too big. The children treat him like a curiosity at first, then like prey. Within a week, he's had ink spilled on his chair, his lunch stolen twice, and one of his boots mysteriously filled with goat droppings. Still, he persists. And slowly the schoolhouse becomes something more than a target for childish mischief. It becomes a place where the village gathers not just for lessons, but for meetings, dances, and the occasional heated discussion about grain prices. You watch this from the manor with quiet pride, sipping tea and resisting the urge to send Jacques a pair of goat-proof galoshes. Then there's the matter of livestock. Cows, in particular, are a recurring theme in your life now. They're everywhere, wandering into gardens, blocking the road, escaping fences you swear were perfectly secure just yesterday. One even gets into the manor's herb patch and eats all the time, an act your wife declares both unforgivable and ironically named. So you hold a meeting. In the schoolhouse, naturally. Tenants gather with folded arms and skeptical eyes. You present a new system, shared grazing zones, communal fence maintenance, and a rotating schedule for pasture use. You expect resistance. What you get is an hour-long debate about whether Baptiste's cow is in fact a habitual fence breaker or merely misunderstood. You settle the matter by offering a modest prize for the best-behaved cow come autumn. The tenants laugh, but they agree. Sometimes dignity is overrated. Results matter more. Your next project, improving the roads. Calling them roads is generous. They're more like mud-stricken goat trails crossed with obstacle courses. But they're the only way to connect Murray Bay with the outside world, especially the port at La Malbaie. You organize a work rotation. Each family contributes a few days of labor each season. It's hard, wet work. Tempers flare, tools break. Someone, no one knows who, accuses someone else of stealing my shovel and my dignity. You patch the argument with extra cider and a promise to host a midsummer feast. Peace returns, more or less. The feast becomes legendary. You roast a whole pig, serve fresh bread, cider flows like spring meltwater, and a fiddler plays until his bowstrings fray. The children race with wooden spoons, the elders swap exaggerated tales of winters that lasted 6 years, and someone, no one knows who, starts a spontaneous group dance that ends with 2 sprained ankles and a lifetime of gossip. These are the moments that make the hard work worth it. Moments when the manor feels less like a fortress and more like a cornerstone, a place where people gather, argue, laugh, and remember what it means to share a valley, even if they don't share a language, a religion, or an opinion on whether goats can be taught manners. You keep writing. Each event goes into your journal. The cow debates, the schoolhouse squabbles, the dance that accidentally knocked over a candle and nearly set Jacques' coat ablaze. You describe these things with a mix of affection and exasperation. You also record dreams, some your own, some overheard. One tenant swears he saw a winged moose. Another claimed the Virgin Dairy appeared in her porridge. You don't judge. You just write. Historians still argue whether these daily journals were intended as a record or as a performance, an early version of legacy building. But to you, they're both. They're how you make sense of a life that's equal parts politics, pig chasing, and prayer. Summer turns to fall. The harvest is good this year, better than most. You host a Thanksgiving Mass. Catholics, yes, but you attend with bowed head and folded hands. The curé nods in your direction. You think you see a flicker of respect behind his spectacles. At the feast afterward, one of your tenants, an elderly widow named Elodie, presents you with a pair of hand-knit socks. For winter, she says simply. You accept them with a smile and a lump in your throat. They're slightly mismatched. You never take them off. You realize in that moment that you're no longer simply the seigneur. You're a neighbor, a character in their stories, a man with a leaky roof, a stubborn son, and a cow-related feud or two. You're also, curiously, content. Not always, not every day, But more often than not, you wake with purpose and go to bed with a sense that something, however small, got better today. A repaired bridge, a new book for the school, a shared laugh over a broken cider barrel. And when you lie awake at night, staring at the low beams above your bed, you no longer wonder if you chose the right place to build a life. You know you did. Because in this wild corner of the world, with its clogs and cows and chalk-dusted children, you found not just survival, but meaning. And possibly the best socks in British North America.
The manor creaks a little more each year. Not dramatically, just enough to remind you that time's been busy with its carving knife. The beams sag like tired shoulders, the stairs groan like old knees, and the front door has developed a personality of its own. It only closes properly if you whisper kind things to it and give it a little nudge with your boot. You've patched, painted, and pleated, but the truth is clear. Your beloved Murray Manor is aging. And so are you. Still, you do your rounds every morning. The orchard first, then the garden, then the slope above the bay where you stand for a long moment, hands behind your back, pretending not to need a cane. The whales have returned early this year, silver-backed giants arching through morning mist, indifferent to wars, winters, and misplaced boundaries. Sometimes you envy them. Back at the manor, your family begins to shift. Your eldest son, Thomas, has come into his own, tall, broad-shouldered, with just enough stubbornness to prove he's yours. He's taken over most of the heavy work, and you've begun to hand over the reins. Not dramatically, just one document, one ledger, one decision at a time. You're still seigneurial, of course, but now it's a role that includes more storytelling than command, more nodding than shouting, more watching than doing. Thomas has ideas. Some are good, like rotating the crops on the north slope to preserve the soil. Others are less good, like importing new farm equipment from England that looks impressive, but immediately sinks into the mud and has to be rescued by 3 horses and one very amused tenant. You let him learn. That's the whole point of aging gracefully. You don't have to fix everything anymore. Your daughters, meanwhile, have grown clever and unpredictable. One wants to teach, another wants to travel. A third has declared she will marry no man unless he can outskate her. So far, no one's qualified. You encourage their ambition, though quietly, knowing full well the world outside Murray Bay isn't always kind to determined young women. Your wife, still sharp, still stubborn, still the heart of the manor. She organizes meals, heals blisters, arbitrates pie-related disputes, and has taken up painting small landscapes that she insists are just for the mantle. One of them, a moody rendition of the river and fog, is quietly better than anything hanging in Quebec's governor's office. You don't tell her that. Let her think it's just a hobby. Letters arrive regularly now, from Quebec, Montreal, even Halifax. Some are invitations, others inquiries. One comes from a university student studying seigneurial life, asking if he might visit and interview you. You say yes, but only if he brings decent paper and doesn't ask stupid questions like, "What's it like to be old?" He arrives 3 weeks later with wide eyes and soft hands. You put him in the loft and feed him stories until he realizes history isn't something you read. It's something you live, spill, bury, and sometimes forget on purpose. He leaves with 30 pages of notes and a much higher tolerance for goat-related interruptions. Historians still debate whether your family's record-keeping was unusually thorough or just accidentally preserved by your habit of stuffing journals into boxes and then using those boxes to prop up uneven chairs. Either way, the result is the same: a rare,
intimate portrait of seigneurial life, equal parts noble idealism and manure stains. And yet, it's not all charming anecdotes and witty letters. There's pressure. By the mid-1800s, murmurs rise across the province. Maybe this whole seigneurial system is outdated. Maybe tenants shouldn't have to pay fealty dues to men who mostly write in English and keep fox pelts in the study. The world is changing. Railroads are snaking through forests. Cities are swelling with industry. Ideas of equality and citizenship and ownership are bubbling up, even in quiet places like Murray Bay. Your tenants still respect you, but you can feel something shifting behind their eyes. Less deference, more calculation. You don't blame them. You've seen enough of empire and rebellion to know that every system, no matter how sturdy, eventually starts to wobble under its own weight. So, you adapt. Quietly, you reduce the rents for older tenants. You waive duties during poor harvests. You begin drafting contracts that give families more autonomy over their plots. Some call it generosity. Others call it cowardice. You call it common sense. You know what's coming. One evening, Thomas sits with you by the hearth and clears his throat. That's how you know he's about to say something that'll make your bones ache. He says, "We need to prepare. They'll abolish it eventually." He means the seigneurial system, the centuries-old arrangement that brought you here, that gave structure to this wild place, that built the manor, paid the schoolmaster, and fed your children. You nod slowly. "Yes," you reply, "but not before we've taught them how to carry it forward." You spend the next months revising documents, settling accounts, teaching your children not just how the system works, but why it ever worked at all. You tell them about respect, about community, about how a good leader listens more than he speaks and eats last when the bread runs low. You don't lie to them. You admit your mistakes, like the time you tried to organize a musical evening with homemade bagpipes, or the fencing experiment that ended with 3 angry goats and 1 missing boot. They laugh, they remember, and you hope, quietly, that memory is enough. Because what you've built isn't just a manor. It's a way of living. A long, slow story etched in snow and sweat and salt air. A tale passed from hands to hands, as fragile and as lasting as any prayer. Outside, the leaves begin to turn. You stand on the bluff one last time before winter sets in. The sky burns with crimson and copper. A hawk circles overhead. Below, the bay ripples gently. A boy walks past leading a cow, probably Baptiste's. You wave. He waves back. Life moves forward. And the manor? It still creaks. But now it creaks with dignity. The letter arrives wrapped in the usual government arrogance. A thick envelope, wax seal, and enough official ribbon to tie up a small deer. You slit it open with a butter knife, because that's what real power looks like, handling the affairs of empire with a utensil meant for scones. Inside, the news is both expected and jarring. The seigneurial system will be formally abolished. Not immediately, not even next week, but soon. The ink of history has already dried, and you're living in the margin notes. The feudal obligations, the land duties, the symbolic hierarchy. It's all being swept away under a tidy label, modernization. Your children find you by the window, letter on your lap, staring out at the trees like you're waiting for one to explain itself. "So that's it?" Thomas asks. You nod. You don't speak for a long time. Just listen to the wind rustling through yellowing leaves, to the distant clatter of hooves on the lane, to the silence between breaths. It's not that you're surprised. You've been watching the world change inch by inch for decades. You've read the reform pamphlets, attended the debates. You've seen the subtle shifts in your tenant's eyes. Less fear, more expectation. Still, it lands like a stone in your chest. What do you do when the structure that shaped your life gets unshaped? When the authority you carried like a mantle becomes a costume in a play no one wants to see anymore? You do what you always do. You walk the land. Your boots find the familiar paths past the chapel, through the orchard, across the bridge you once helped build stone by stone. It's October. The air is sharp, the colors violent, gold, fire, rust. A squirrel watches you from a low branch, holding an acorn like it's daring you to make a speech. You don't. You just nod. Even the squirrels have better things to do now. At the village, you visit Elodie, now nearly blind, still sharp as vinegar. They've abolished us, you say. She snorts. Took them long enough. You both laugh. She offers tea. You drink in silence, the kind that only very old friends can share. When you leave, she slips a baked apple into your hand and says, "For the end of the world." You take it. Back at the manor, your family gathers in the study. The fire crackles. The children, some with families of their own now, listen as you lay out the future. You explain how the lands will transition, what rights the tenants will gain, what responsibilities they must bear. You don't sugarcoat it. You owe them honesty, your wife reminds you. I owe them everything, you reply. The next day, you call a meeting. The schoolhouse is packed. Every family sends someone. Some faces are familiar. Others are the children of those who once stormed your cider feasts or complained about Baptiste's cow. You stand at the front. No grand chair, no elevated dais, just a creaky floorboard under your boot and a bit of chalk in your hand. You draw a rough sketch of the land on the blackboard and start talking. You explain what's changing. You explain what's staying. You talk about soil and inheritance and weather and stubborn weeds that choke good barley. You talk about how titles don't matter as much as hands in the dirt and meals shared and roofs kept patched through mutual effort. And then, softly, the title of seigneur is ending, but this, you gestured to the room, the people, the land outside. This only ends if we let it. There's a pause. Then someone claps. Then another. It's not a riotous ovation, but it's real, earned. Afterward, Baptiste, now gray and stooped, shuffles up and presses a folded piece of paper into your hand. A list, he says. You open it later. It's a tally of whose cows broke whose fences over the years. At the bottom, he scrawled, "No winner, just survivors." You pin it to your wall. Life continues, almost rudely. The manor doesn't vanish. The bay doesn't stop shimmering. The school bell still rings each morning, and children still complain that porridge tastes like boiled regret. And your role? It shifts. You become the advisor, the storyteller, the memory keeper. People knock on your door less to ask permission, more to ask wisdom. You don't mind. It's quieter. You have more time to garden, to walk, to read the books you swore you'd get to once the roads were fixed and the fences mended and the future secured. One day, a stranger arrives. Young, wide-eyed, dressed like someone who owns too many waistcoats. He's writing a book on the fall of seigneurialism, wants to interview you. You agree, but only after he spends a day hauling firewood with your grandsons. When he finally sits down, sore and muddy, he asks, "Do you regret building all of this knowing it would be dismantled?" You smile. Dismantled, you echo? Look around. He does. Sees children chasing each other, sees neighbors hauling pumpkins from wagons, sees Thomas teaching two boys how to straighten a fence post with nothing but rope, a rock, and some stubborn optimism. You wave your hand. This isn't rubble. It's roots. Historians still debate whether the fall of Murray Manor marked the end of an age or the beginning of something freer. But here, in the valley, where the wind still tugs at the eaves and the bay sighs like a sleeping beast, there's no debate. What you built didn't fall. It grew. Quietly, patiently, deep enough that even the abolition of a title can't touch it. Back in your study, you place the government's letter, creased, faded into a drawer. You don't need it anymore. You know what you are. And the land does too.
Winter comes earlier this year. The frost is thick by mid-October. By November, snow covers the old trail to the chapel in a dense, silent blanket. The manor feels more like a ship at sea than a house on land, isolated, creaking, surrounded by white. When the wind howls across the bay, the shutters rattle like bones, and you half expect to see sails outside the window. You've known many winters, but this one feels different, slower, quieter. The kind of cold that isn't just in the air, but in your bones. Even the kettle takes longer to boil now. Even the fire seems to hesitate before catching. But you're not afraid. If anything, winter gives you time to think. It's during this cold lull that you begin sorting through the past. You open drawers, you unlace boxes, you pull journals off shelves so dusty they sneeze when touched. You find letters your father wrote to the crown, brittle as dried leaves. Deeds written in both English and French. A child's drawing of a very square cow labeled mine. You recognize the handwriting. Your daughter, the one who once insisted on naming every chicken after Queen Charlotte. And then there are the journals. Your journals, years of them, bound in leather or thread or string or hope. Some entries span pages. Weather reports, harvest tallies, disputes settled, births recorded. Others are just a line. Baptiste built a sled today. It collapsed under the priest. You laugh aloud at that one. The manor echoes back. It always does now. The silence has grown thick, like another member of the household. Some nights you speak aloud just to hear your voice push against it. The manor doesn't mind. It's used to your mumbling, your muttering, your half-sung hymns when you think no one is listening. And someone always is. Your grandchildren, perhaps, or the wind. You decide to start writing something new, not for the government, not for the village, just for the ones who will come after. A kind of farewell letter, but warmer. A story. A memory bundle. You title it, This Place Was Real. Each day after chores, you sit at the desk near the window. The quill scrapes, the ink blots, the sentences form. You write about the land before it had fences, about your father's arrival with a chest full of books and an accent thick enough to stop a clock. Your mother who boiled birch sap when sugar was scarce, and could make a roast squirrel taste like Sunday dinner. You write about Thomas, your son, and how he once tried to build a windmill using only driftwood, rope, and the power of pure optimism. It collapsed in under a minute. He laughed, then tried again. That second version stood for 6 years. You write about your tenants, their weddings, their babies, their arguments. The time a curé tried to outlaw fiddle music, and the entire village responded by forming a fiddle band. You remember that performance well. It was terrible.
but it was joyful. Some entries hurt more to write. The war, the cannon fire that took your brother, the day your wife miscarried alone while you were in Quebec on business. You hold those pages a little longer, waiting for the ink to dry, as if time can still change anything. And yet you keep writing, because history that isn't told becomes dust. One stormy night, the family gathers around the hearth. The fire is loud, the wind louder, but everyone listens as you read a passage from your new manuscript. It's the part about the Great Flood, the one that nearly carried off the schoolhouse and definitely carried off the mayor's trousers. The children howl with laughter. But you also read the next part, the slow rebuild, the shared bread, the night the villagers sang as they hammered the last board back into place. You glance up and see quiet in their eyes now, respect, maybe even wonder. After the reading, your daughter lingers behind. "You should publish it," she says. You shrug. Who would read it? She smiles. Everyone who forgot that this place mattered. The next morning, you find a new ink pot on your desk. Some evenings you dream strange things. The manor is always there and the dream, but brighter, larger. The corridors stretch like rivers. The windows look out on green fields that sway without wind. And the people, they move through the halls like memory itself, blurry at the edges, warm at the center. One night, you dream of your father. He's young again, and so are you. You're arguing about taxes. Some things never change. But then, he laughs, grabs your shoulder and says, "You kept it going. You did well, lad." You wake with tears in your beard. Historians still debate whether these final years of the seigneurial system were mere decline or a period of graceful transition. You know the truth lies somewhere in the middle. The title faded, yes, but the heart, the connection between people and land, that pulsed stronger than ever. The villagers no longer pay 150, but they still wave when you pass. They still leave baskets of bread or herbs on your steps. They still knock to ask which crop should follow barley. You no longer have legal authority, but you have something better. Trust. Memory. A legacy stitched into the soil like threads in an old quilt. One snowy morning, you wake early. The sun hasn't risen, but the bay glows silver under the moon. You dress slowly, layer by layer, until you resemble a walking armchair. Then you step outside. It's quiet. Utterly, perfectly quiet. You walk to the edge of the property, the same path you've walked for 60 years. The trees are white skeletons. The fence is a low ridge of snow. Somewhere an owl hoots. You close your eyes and breathe. This is not an ending. This is a season. And like all seasons in Murray Bay, it will pass and return and pass again. And someone you'll never meet will walk this same path someday and wonder who came before. Let them find your words. Let them know this place was real, and so were you. By spring, the snow thaws reluctantly, as if even winter isn't ready to leave this place. You step outside one morning and notice the bay no longer groans beneath the ice. The path to the village is a muddy ribbon, and the tips of crocuses poke defiantly through the earth's small, soft rebellions against the cold. And yet, something's different this year. The villagers have changed. It's in the way they speak to each other in the square, and how they vote, and how they look at the land not as borrowed space under a title, but as their own.
You've stepped into the twilight of a system and the dawn of something entirely new: participation. It began with the ballots. Once upon a time, you would have delivered announcements on behalf of Quebec City or the bishop or some distant figure in London who'd never touched snow. Now, the villagers gather to discuss matters face to face. And not just the men, women too. Grandmothers, bakers, former tenants, former servants, if one still dares to use that word. They stand in the schoolhouse, wearing shawls and stained aprons, and they vote. At first it startled you. Old habits die hard. Authority doesn't melt as quickly as snow. But then you watch them debate road repairs or whether to build a second chimney on the church. Passionate arguments, yes, but respectful, orderly, cooperative. You remember the day Etienne, a boy who once stole your apples, stood up and made a case for bringing more teachers to the region. Our children need more than soil, he said. They need stories, equations, dreams. The room erupted in applause. You clapped the loudest. Back at the manor, you host small gatherings now, not to issue decrees, but to drink coffee, share bread, and discuss how the old ways are giving way to shared voices. There are arguments, yes, there always are. One woman insists the post office be moved closer to the chapel. Another demands that mail be delivered by sleigh, even in April. You smile through all of it. These aren't complaints. They're declarations of ownership. The people feel seen, and that's worth everything. One afternoon, a visitor arrives from Quebec City. Young, polished, smells like ink and starch. He asks for a tour of the manor and introduces himself as a clerk compiling a report on the effects of seigneurial abolition. "I'm here to record how the people responded," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "They're right outside. Ask them." He blinks, but to his credit, he does. And later, as you sip tea by the window, you see him in the square, note-taking furiously while Madame Poirier scolds him about how the real power has always been the ones who bake the bread, not the ones who tax the oven. You nearly choke laughing. There's more laughter in the village now, more music too. Children learning violin, old men forming quartets. Sunday evenings have become informal concerts, with fiddles screeching alongside drums fashioned from barrels. Even the curé has stopped complaining. He claps politely now, even when the music veers suspiciously toward the devil's tempo. Your granddaughter plays flute. Badly, but with heart. Historians still argue whether the expansion of rural voting rights during this era truly empowered the people or simply gave the illusion of control. But when you watch a woman who once begged for firewood now call for irrigation reform, you don't need footnotes. You just nod. The land remains the same, mostly. The apple trees bud. The cows trudge in familiar ruts. The river swells with meltwater and then calms, as if sighing. But the rhythm has changed. There's movement, growth, even ambition. Plans are drawn for a small library, a newspaper, a new school that will teach both English and French side by side, like twin branches from the same root. Not everyone embraces it. Old Shock, who's been sharpening axes longer than Canada's been a country, mutters that books are fine, but they won't milk your goats. But even he donated a coin when the school fund passed around the square. And what of you? You observe. You walk slowly now, leaning more on your cane. The manor is quieter than ever. Some rooms remain shut all winter. The roof leaks in places you don't have the strength to patch, but it still holds. So do you. On your birthday, they throw a feast.
A surprise, though the scent of roasted lamb wafting through the village was something of a giveaway. The whole square is strung with lanterns. Children run barefoot. A fiddler plays a tune you haven't heard since your wedding. And when you arrive, escorted by your youngest grandchild, who insists you wear a paper crown, you see a sign strung between two trees. To the man who listened. You nearly cry. Instead, you eat 3 servings of stew and lose at checkers to a boy with jam on his fingers. That night, back in the manor, you sit by the fire and watch the flames dance. The paper crown lies beside your chair. A kitten purrs on your lap. A gift from a girl named Solange, who claims she found it in the old granary. You name it Inkspot. The village doesn't need a seigneur anymore. It needs stories. It needs memory. It needs a witness. You're happy to be that, and so you keep writing. Not rules, not orders, remembrance. You start a new chapter. When they stopped asking for permission, they started asking for advice. And you gave it, because your role now is not to lead, but to steady, to comfort, to remind people that what they build together will always outlast what is imposed from above. Outside, the wind has stilled, the stars blink awake. And across the bay, in a house that once belonged to a tenant named Baptiste, someone strikes a match and lights a lamp. A small, golden flicker in the dark. You smile. The future doesn't always roar. Sometimes it glows.
It begins with the sound of iron wheels on damp earth. One morning, as you sit beneath the manor's sagging porch roof with a cup of chicory coffee, you hear an unfamiliar rattling far off in the valley. Not a cart, not a sleigh. Something deeper, more determined. You squint into the rising sun, and there it is. A puff of smoke, a thin, wriggling line of soot climbing into the blue sky. The railroad is coming. You set your coffee down without sipping. The Bay never asked for trains, but the 19th century doesn't care much for permission. By autumn, the track runs within a few miles of Murray Bay. A wooden station appears almost overnight like a mushroom after rain. The townspeople gather, coats flapping in the wind, to watch the first locomotive roll in. It screeches, hisses, and groans, a mechanical beast that smells like coal, sweat, and tomorrow. You can feel the land shift. It's not just the railway. Everything is moving faster. Ideas arrive from Montreal in a matter of days. Goods that used to take weeks by ship are now piled high in crates marked with destinations you've never heard of. Letters are posted, seeds exchanged, music traded. And with the trains come strangers, men with polished boots and too many questions. Some carry Bibles, some carry rifles, all carry ambition. And yet the people of Murray Bay do not flinch. They adapt. Farmers become merchants. One family opens a boarding house. Another begins selling maple syrup in glass bottles with hand-painted labels. Children born in the manor's shadow now dream of becoming engineers, doctors, artists, even if they've never met one. You walk the station platform with your cane, watching wide-eyed boys press their faces to train windows, whispering about Quebec City, about Toronto, about places where the streets never sleep. You wonder if they know how fast the world is spinning. You wonder if you ever did. Then the political pamphlets start arriving, folded sheets with bold headlines and angry fonts. People arguing in print about Confederation, about taxes, about who should own what and where and for how long. The village blacksmith becomes a loud voice for reform. The schoolmaster starts quoting Locke during lunch. Even the curé weighs in, gently but firmly, about the dangers of forgetting one's roots. And you listen.
you've learned that speaking too quickly in times like these is a good way to be remembered badly. Historians still argue whether the reforms of the 1850s and 1860s marked the true beginning of modern Quebec or merely a reshuffling of colonial furniture. Either way, in Murray Bay, the effect is undeniable. Authority is no longer anchored in title or land. It's in motion, like the trains, like the ideas, like the rust creeping along the wrought iron hinges of your manor door. You patch the roof again that spring, or rather, you help supervise while two boys named Luke and Harry climb up and shout down measurements, tools, jokes about your eyesight. They work with energy. You watch with pride. And yes, a little sadness. Because the manor, once the heart of the valley, is now more memory than magnet. No one comes to pay rent. No one asks permission to build or harvest. They come to borrow books or ask if you remember when the cow got stuck in the chapel. You always do. The stone walls are strong, but the floors creak more. The windows fog more easily. Some doors swell so badly in spring that they won't open without a good kick. And still, you love it. You keep a candle lit in the study each evening. It's unnecessary. There's plenty of lamp oil. But it reminds you of your mother's habit, back when candlelight was more than just ambience. You sit there sometimes and read the same letter twice, or stare at the spine of a book you once promised to finish, or fold your hands and simply exist. Sometimes you dream of leaving, selling the place, moving to Quebec, living in a smaller house with modern shutters and fewer memories. But then you open a drawer and find your father's seal ring, still dusty from disuse, and you remember why you stayed. Because someone had to. Because legacy doesn't mean clinging. It means standing still while others build ladders on your shoulders. Still, change creeps in like ivy through stone. One Sunday, the curé announces that Mass will alternate languages, French and English, every other week. You blink. A decade ago, such a move would have sparked heated arguments and long letters to the bishop. Now, people nod. A few frown, but most simply adjust their pew cushions and carry on. The children in the schoolhouse start learning geography, real geography, with maps that stretch across oceans. One girl draws a careful outline of India and points out where John Nairn, the first seigneur, once served with the British Army. Her pronunciation is questionable. Her curiosity is perfect. You walk home from that lesson smiling. But not all changes are bright. The forests thin, the hills wear new scars from timber operations, the rivers run cloudier in spring, a new tannery opens downstream and the fish grow smaller, warier, sometimes gone entirely. You speak at a village meeting about sustainability, a word no one has used before, and some nod, others shrug. Progress is messy. And personal change comes too. Your knees ache in the rain. You forget names more often. One day you wake up and realize the walk to the chapel, once effortless, now takes twice as long. Inkspot, your cat, seems to age with you. She sleeps all day and curls beside you by the fire like a co-conspirator in quietness. And yet, amid all this fading, a strange comfort blooms, because the village isn't fading, it's flowering. It no longer leans on the manor like it once did. It doesn't need to. You've helped raise something strong enough to stand alone. One evening, as the train whistles through the valley, you sit with your journal and write, I am no longer the future of this place, but I am still its memory. And memory is not weakness. It is root.
You wake before dawn, though no rooster crows and no one calls your name. The manor is still, the kind of still that comes not from emptiness, but from deep sleep. The wind whispers through the old timbers. The fire has long since gone cold. You sit up slowly, every joint reporting in like soldiers at roll call. There's something in the air today, a shift, a hush that feels like reverence. You felt it before, on the day your first child was born, on the morning after the flood, on the afternoon they laid your father to rest beneath the tall oak. You dress with care, not because anyone will see you, but because it feels right. You button your oldest vest, worn soft by time and memory, and slip your watch into its pocket. It no longer keeps time, but it still remembers how. Downstairs, the kettle sings. You wait patiently, then pour the water over tea leaves grown somewhere far beyond these hills. India, perhaps. A gift from a merchant who passed through town last year, smelling of spices and ambition. You take your tea outside. The world greets you gently. Mist clings to the valley like lace on a bride's veil. The bay glows with early light. The trees stand hushed, as if listening. And somewhere just out of sight, a child laughs. You smile without thinking. The village is awake. But the manor? It's ready to sleep. You walk its room slowly. Each creak of the floorboard is a hello and a goodbye. You touch the stone walls, warm from sun and years. In the kitchen, you pause by the mark on the doorframe where generations of children were measured. The pencil lines rise like steps into the past. Above them, your own name, etched faintly, almost lost to time. The attic still smells of cedar and ink. You find an old trunk and lift the lid. Letters, sketches, a half-finished quilt. You tuck a bundle of your writings inside, tie it with twine, and label it simply, "For whoever needs this." Historians still argue whether the manor system was a relic or a root, whether it deserved to vanish or deserved to be transformed. But as you stand in this attic, looking over the artifacts of 100 lived years, you know the truth is less tidy. It was both. It was flawed. It was faithful. It was human. Downstairs, you find your granddaughter waiting. She's brought fresh bread, still warm. She places it on the table without speaking, as if she too senses the quiet spell over the day. You sit together, sipping tea and watching the light move across the wooden floor. "Do you think they'll remember?" she asks at last. You look at her, not just her face, but her presence, the way she holds a mug like your mother did, the tilt of her head, inherited from a grandmother she never met, the fire in her voice unmistakably yours. "They already do," you whisper. And they will. Because you've given them more than stories. You've given them maps, emotional, moral, historical, to guide them when the world feels too large or too fast or too forgetful. You've shown them that legacy isn't marble or title or wealth. It's the way a stranger is welcomed. It's the way a song is remembered. It's the way a child is taught to plant something that may outlive them. You and your granddaughter walk the path down to the chapel. It's not Sunday, but she lights a candle anyway. For the past, for what comes next, for the señor who stopped ruling and started remembering. On the way back, she asks what you think happens when people pass on. You pause. "Well," you say, "I think you become part of the story." She nods. Doesn't press. The sun sets slowly that evening, like it too doesn't want to go. You sit on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, ink spot curled in your lap, and watch the last train of the day whistle past the edge of the trees. Its lights flicker like fireflies. Its path is sure, but not hurried. Not tonight. The manor behind you is quiet, dignified, gently falling into rest. The vines climb its stones with patience. The grass grows long at its edges. It is no longer the center of power, but it is still the heart of something. And the heart remembers. The next morning,
You don't wake up. The tea goes unboiled. The chair stays empty. But before the silence can take hold, the door opens. Your granddaughter steps in. Eyes soft, arms steady. She doesn't cry right away. Instead, she smiles. Because she knows. Because she found the bundle in the attic. Because she's already planning a gathering in the square, not to mourn, but to read your words aloud. To remind the town that its history is not dead. That it walks beside them in the form of old oak trees, crooked staircases, and the unmistakable scent of birch sap boiling on the stove. That night, they light lanterns. One by one, flames appear in windows and along fences. Children carry candles. Elders tell stories. And across the bay, your manor stands like a sentinel. Old, tired, but never empty. It has become a memory made of stone and time. And that, dear listener, is where you rest. Now.
You stand in front of the tombstone now, hands behind your back, as the wind curls around your coat and the grasses sway in solemn rhythm. There's no fanfare here, no elaborate mausoleum, no statue on horseback. Just a simple granite slab nestled into the mossy earth, carved with one name, John Nairn. You trace the letters with your eyes, not your fingers. There's something sacred about not touching, about just witnessing. It doesn't say seigneur. It doesn't list battles or titles. No mention of the American Revolution, of Gibraltar, of the decades he spent carving a world out of northern wilderness. Just a name and a pair of dates. A whole life, a whole dynasty, compressed into 2 numbers and a dash. You look up. The old oak above the grave stretches its limbs toward the sky, as if it too remembers. Its bark is split and weathered, like the pages of a book left open for too many seasons. The roots dig deep, unbothered by politics, memory, or legacy. And yet, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the tree sigh. Because this was never just one man's grave. It was the anchor of a century, the resting place for dreams that once spanned empires, for letters sent across oceans, for duels fought with silence, for dinners where no one sat in the wrong chair, for daughters who married out, sons who died far from home, and neighbors who quietly watched it all unfold. They're buried here too, in a way. Not in the soil, but in the silence. You kneel not out of reverence, but out of exhaustion. The manor is still visible in the distance, just over the hill. Its roof is sagging. A shutter dangles like a loose tooth. The path leading to it is overgrown now, nearly swallowed by weeds. But it stands, stubborn, proud, weathered. Like its builder, like you. Historians still argue whether John Nairn was a romantic failure or a pragmatic settler. Some say he clung too tightly to the British dream in a place that never wanted it. Others claim he planted a seed of order in a wilderness of confusion. They all agree he was complicated. But then again, who isn't? Especially when trying to build something meant to last. You imagine him standing here, boots caked in mud, hands raw from frostbite, staring out at the bay in the dead of winter and whispering to himself, "This will do." And he made it do, for a while. 100 years later, and the manor is no longer a symbol of control. It's a story now, a cautionary tale, a warm memory, a place where time folds back on itself. But here, at the headstone, everything feels quiet. Not defeated, just complete. You rise slowly and walk the perimeter of the graveyard. There are other names, too. MacLeod, Tremblay, Charbonneau, Doucet. Families who once owed the Nairns their harvests, their loyalty, their grudging respect.
Their descendants now walk freely through the village, owning stores, writing poetry, teaching history. Some still live in the same houses, their walls patched and painted, but structurally unchanged. The land remembers them, even if the textbooks don't. Back in the village square, a small wooden sign has been nailed to a post beside the chapel. It reads, Murray Manor, Heritage Site. Tours Sundays at 3 p.m. Ask for Colette at the bakery. You smile at the thought. Colette was the one who used to sneak gingerbread to the manor children during long sermons. Her hands smelled of cinnamon and her voice could shoo away crows. Now she leads tours, wears reading glasses, keeps a folder of laminated pages in her apron. She's become a historian in her own right, and that's how it happens. Legacy doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hums in the background while someone explains how the seigneurial dues worked, or points out the scuff mark on the stair that young Thomas made the day he tried to ride a goat indoors. You visit the manor once more that afternoon. Inside, the furniture is dusty but intact. The portraits on the wall have faded to soft ghosts. The table still bears the nick from where someone once slammed a candlestick in frustration, perhaps over taxes, perhaps over love. The kitchen smells faintly of thyme, maybe rosemary. You wander room to room, whispering names as if to stir the dust into life. In the study, you find an old pipe resting in a dish. In the nursery, a wooden toy horse with one leg missing. In the hallway, a scrap of ribbon tucked into a drawer, purple, stiff with age. In the back garden, something miraculous. The peonies still bloom. No one remembers planting them. No one tends them now. But they return each spring, stubborn as memory, soft as lullabies. Their petals open like cupped hands, holding nothing but air and intention. You crouch and smell them. They smell like June, like letters written on a windowsill, like wool drying by a fire, like being known by name. And as you straighten up, you hear voices behind you. Children. 3 of them skipping stones in the shallow part of the river, laughing in 2 languages, singing a song whose words you half recognize. One of them sees you and waves. You wave back. Then you leave. Not because you're finished, but because you're full. This place, this house, this family, none of it lasted forever. Not in the way they hoped. The British Crown doesn't write them letters anymore. The tenants no longer bow. The system is gone, dismantled plank by plank, law by law. But something remains. A stone. A name. A bloom. A child waving to a stranger by the river. The path to the manor is easier now. Not because the stones are smoother or the weeds are cleared, but because you've walked it so many times, first in boots, later in memory, and now in something softer still, nostalgia. You arrive not as a seigneur or a guest, not even as a historian. You arrive like the breeze through an open window, unannounced, gentle, searching. The sun is high. A family is picnicking near the orchard. Children dart between trees, their voices lifted in squeals of the light. The manor looms behind them, no longer stern, but softened by the years, like an elder who stopped correcting grammar and just listens to the stories. A young man sketches on a bench. He glances at you, nods, and returns to his pad. You pass by and see what he's drawing. The window above the kitchen, where the curtains flutter like breath. Below it, someone's written in chalk on the stone wall. Everything old was once new.
You enter the manor one final time. It's cooler inside, quiet but not empty. The air smells of old wood and lemon oil. Someone has opened the parlor windows. The gauzy curtains ripple in the breeze like ghosts who've given up haunting and decided to dance instead. The dining room table has been restored. A vase of wildflowers sits in the center. Daisies, Queen Anne's lace, a single peony. On the mantel rests a photograph of the Nairn family. You recognize faces now. John's hard eyes, Thomas's soft smile, the unnamed sister who once embroidered birds into every handkerchief. The tour begins in 10 minutes, but you don't need it. You're already on the final page. You slip through rooms like a scent, like a memory. The wallpaper peels in places, the floor groans under your feet, but it all feels intentional, honest. No need to pretend here. This house has been many things: fortress, refuge, prison, school, sanctuary. And now? Now it's a story someone brings their children to hear. Out in the garden, 2 teenagers lie on the grass, headphones in, eyes closed. One murmurs something about a ghost cat, and they both laugh. You can almost hear Ink Spot purring from a tree branch. In the kitchen, a volunteer reads aloud from your letters. Her voice is soft, slightly unsure. The audience of 3 tourists leans forward, enchanted. One of them wipes away a tear and doesn't know why. You do. Because words carry weight long after the speaker is gone. Because legacy is a string that reaches into futures we never see. Because something in this house, in this air, whispers, you were here. You mattered. You linger in the upstairs hallway. One door is shut, sealed long ago. No one remembers why. Maybe it was a child's room, maybe a study. Maybe it's better left unopened. Some stories prefer mystery. They're stronger that way. At the end of the hall, you find a new addition. A glass case holds artifacts: an iron key, a cracked teacup, a child's boot, a scrap of tartan. Beneath it, a small plaque reads, 100 years at Murray Manor. A dynasty of people, not power. You smile. Someone got it right. Outside, the tour begins. A dozen visitors gather in the shade while a young guide points to the windows, to the chapel beyond, to the sweep of trees that once formed the estate boundary. She tells them about seigneurs, about tenants, about the way history carves grooves into people's lives, whether they notice or not. She doesn't mention the scandal with the priest, or the winter when they burned floorboards for warmth, or the smell of cider rising from the cellar during harvest. But that's okay. You carry those stories. You walk slowly back toward the gate. A child breaks away from the group and runs past you, arms outstretched like wings. For a moment, she becomes a gull catching the wind. Then she turns and says, "Did you live here?" You pause. You nod. She doesn't need an explanation. She's already part of it. You reach the edge of the property where the path disappears into the pines. The sun filters through the branches in long, sleepy beams. Everything is gold and green and gently fading. And so, you let go. The manor behind you breathes one last time. You become part of its dust, its beams, its laughter, its bloom. Not gone. Just remembered. Just enough.
So now the walk is finished. The walls have spoken. The bay has fallen quiet. The winds have curled back into the hills.
Let it all grow soft now, the stone, the memory, the footprints on the garden path. You've stayed a while here, and the house is grateful. It remembers your steps, your questions, your quiet listening. It will remember always. Breathe slower now. Let your chest rise like the tide at dusk. Let your thoughts drift with the scent of old wood and river mist. Feel the hush settle over your shoulders like a blanket passed down through generations, stitched with stories, heavy with peace. You've seen the start and the ending. You've felt the pride and the ache. You've watched a family become legend, then memory, then myth. But even now, long after the letters have faded and the graves have grown moss, something remains. Not the names, but the light in the windows, the hush in the orchard, the stories retold without anyone remembering where they started. And you, dear listener, are part of it now. So let your breath deepen. Let the night gather gently around you like fog rising off the water. Let your dreams carry you down the old path to the bay, where the lanterns still glow and the tea never grows cold. The manor sleeps now, and so should you.